Have you ever bought a digital game only to find it suddenly disappears from your library?
Oh, yeah. Or heard about a favorite online world just poof, vanishing.
Exactly. It's this strange tension, isn't it, that sits right at the heart of our digital lives. That feeling of truly owning something versus the often hidden reality of digital licenses.
Yeah, what you actually get.
So today, we're taking a deep dive into what the industry calls game sunsetting.
Right.
It's a controversial practice, seems to be getting more common in the video game world.
Definitely.
We've gathered a stack of articles, some pretty in-depth research, and plenty of player accounts to really try and understand why this happens.
And who it affects most, yeah.
Who it affects, and what, if anything, is actually being done about it.
It's a big question.
Our mission here is really to unpack this complex issue, explore the arguments from, every angle,
From the big publishers making these calls.
to the passionate players who often feel completely well betrayed.
Understandably so in many cases.
And ultimately, it's about understanding what all of this means for you, the digital consumer, and maybe for the very future of digital art and culture.
It's a fascinating conflict, really. The core disconnect, as I see it, is the industry largely viewing games as temporary services.
Right, like a subscription you lose access to.
Exactly. While players, quite naturally, often expect them to be permanent products they own, like buying a book.
Okay.
And this fundamental difference, it's sparking a fierce debate that's now, interestingly, grabbed the attention of regulators worldwide.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it's forcing this big reevaluation of what ownership truly means in the digital space.
So let's start by defining this term, sunsetting. It sounds quite gentle, doesn't it?
It does. Very corporate speak.
Like a planned, orderly, graceful phasing out of a service. But it can manifest in a few different ways, right?
Yeah, it's not always the same thing.
You might see specific content vaulted within an active game. I remember hearing about Destiny 2 doing this.
That's a good example. Older weapons, armor, planets sometimes, just made unavailable, often to push players toward the new stuff.
Right, keep engagement up on the latest content.
Exactly. But then there's the other kind.
The more contentious form, yeah.
Yeah.
The one that really ignites the public outcry.
The
The complete shutdown of online servers.
The plug gets pulled.
And for games designed to be always online, this effectively just terminates the game's existence, makes it completely unplayable.
Even if you bought a physical disc for it, which feels particularly wrong to many people.
Absolutely. Which leads to the player term.
Precisely. And that's exactly why players have adopted that far more visceral term for it. Killing games.
It's much more active language.
It doesn't frame it as some passive business process. It frames it as active, deliberate destruction of something customers paid for.
And it highlights that feeling of violated consumer rights. People even call it.
Cultural vandalism.
Yeah.
Yeah, that term is gaining traction, especially when you think about preservation.
What's really interesting here is that this rise of killing games isn't just random. It seems like a direct consequence of the dominant business model today. Games as a service, or GaaS.
Oh, absolutely. Gas is key to understanding this whole situation.
It's a fundamental shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
Evolved from those early 2000s MMOs like World of Warcraft or RuneScape.
Yeah, the pioneers of keeping people playing and paying for years.
Moving away from just selling a single self-contained product to providing continuous content for, recurring revenue.
Bingo. Keep them hooked, keep them paying.
The whole idea behind GaaS is keeping players engaged in spending, not just on the initial purchase price.
Right.
That's where we see so many monetization strategies now, far beyond just buying the game up front. Microtransactions.
For cosmetics, boosts, in-game currency, yeah.
Season passes, battle passes, offering tiered rewards over time.
Creating that FOMO, fear of missing out.
And of course, subscription services like Xbox Game Pass or EA Play, bundling access.
You've hit on the core of it there. This model creates an ongoing dependency.
Dependency. How so?
Well, your ability to access and truly enjoy the game you quote-unquote bought becomes perpetually contingent on the publisher continuing to provide services.
So the servers, the moderation, the patches.
Exactly, all that back-end stuff. This architectural dependency is the very root of the issue.
Okay.
We really wouldn't see killing games happening at this scale if GaaS hadn't made games so reliant on centralized publisher-controlled servers for their basic functionality.
It couldn't happen with, say, an old single-player CD-ROM game.
Not in the same way, no. Once you had it, you had it. Maybe a patch stopped working, but the core game was usually yours.
So, okay, why do publishers actually do this? From their side, sunsetting is often framed as a necessary business practice,
Yeah.
right? Driven by some pretty harsh realities.
You're right. It's rarely presented as malicious. It's framed as business necessity. Let's unpack the economic realities first, because that's often number one.
Okay, the costs.
Online games demand significant ongoing expenditure. Servers aren't free, maintenance, support staff, it all adds up. So, the primary driver for a shutdown is often simple commercial non-viability, when the revenue coming in no longer covers those substantial costs.
It's losing money.
Exactly. Continuing a service that's losing money indefinitely is just unsustainable for most businesses.
Makes sense from a purely financial view.
And beyond just stopping losses, sunsetting allows for strategic resource reallocation.
Meaning moving people and money elsewhere.
Precisely. Companies move valuable talent, server capacity, marketing budgets from underperforming titles to new, more promising projects. Epic Games shutting down Paragon to shift developers to Fortnite.
Ah, yeah, I remember that. Fortnite obviously exploded.
A stark example. Plus, we operate in a hyper-competitive market. Many live service games fail, and fail quickly.
Oh, definitely. We've seen some high-profile flameouts.
Think of Sony's Concord shutting down in, 14 days? Amazon's Crucible, Platinum Games' Babylon's Fall? They barely got started.
Wow, yeah, so publishers feel they need an off-ramp.
Exactly. A way to cut their losses when something isn't working.
But it's not just about the money, is it? You mentioned technical hurdles, too.
Significant ones. Modern online games have incredibly complex, integrated architecture.
Meaning everything's tangled together.
Deeply intertwined. Online features, matchmaking, player profiles, storefronts. They're all connected to proprietary back-end systems. Retrofitting them for offline play isn't just a few tweaks.
It's not easy.
It can be a monumental engineering task.
Yeah.
And creating a robust end-of-life plan, like a proper offline mode or reliable private server tools, would require a huge investment.
Right when the game is making the least money.
Exactly. The worst possible time financially. And publishers argue that mandating such costly solutions would raise baseline development costs for all online games.
Leading to what they call a chilling effect.
Yeah, a chilling effect on innovation. They argue it could lead to less risk-taking, fewer ambitious online features, maybe fewer games overall, or just higher prices for consumers.
Okay, so economics, technical challenges. What about legal issues? IP.
Big ones there too. Intellectual property, or IP, and legal imperatives. Publishers argue mandating games remain operable after support ends fundamentally undermines their creator control.
How so?
Releasing server code, for instance, risks exposing valuable trade secrets, the secret sauce of how their games work.
Right, their competitive edge.
But maybe the most intractable problem here is third-party licensing constraints. This is a huge hurdle.
What kind of third-party stuff?
Games contain tons of licensed technologies. Game engines like Unreal or Unity, physics libraries like Havok, audio middleware like FMOD, Wise, and especially licensed music.
The music licenses always seem tricky.
They often are. These licenses are typically only for the game's commercial life and strictly prohibit sublicensing them to players or anyone else.
So when the license runs out.
It often forces the game to be delisted from sale. And releasing server code containing that licensed tech would be a massive breach of contract, massive copyright infringement, huge legal liability.
Okay, that's a naughty one.
It really is. Then you also have trademark and brand protection. Unofficial servers mean versions of the game exist outside the publisher's control.
Which could lead to problems.
Yeah, potential trademark confusion, maybe damage to the brand's reputation if the unofficial servers are poorly run or host inappropriate content.
Which brings us to player safety, right? That's another angle publishers raise.
Exactly. Player safety and platform compliance. They argue that on private, unofficial servers, they lose the ability to moderate content.
No way to enforce their terms of service.
Right. Leading to potential harassment, hate speech, cheating, other illegal or harmful stuff. Their official reporting systems wouldn't work there.
And cheating could run rampant.
Potentially, yeah. Plus, publishers are bound by codes of conduct for compliance with rating systems like PAYG or ESRB, especially around online safety for minors. That's impossible to guarantee on servers they don't control.
So that's quite a list of reasons from the publisher's perspective.
Yeah.
Economics, tech, legal, safety.
It's a complex picture from their side, for sure.
But let's flip the coin. From the consumer's perspective, These shutdowns aren't just cold business decisions. They often feel like a profound breach of trust.
Oh, absolutely. A destructive act, even.
And at the core of that player, grievance seems to be this illusion of ownership.
That's a great way to put it. The illusion of ownership versus consumer rights. When you click buy now, especially for a full price game.
60, $70 sometimes.
Exactly. You reasonably expect to acquire some form of ownership, something lasting.
Yeah, like buying a movie on Blu-ray.
Right. So the revelation that you've only purchased a temporary revocable license, it feels inherently misleading.
Especially because that distinction isn't always super clear up front, is it?
Not transparently communicated at the point of sale, usually. Then you have the infamous EULA, the End User License Agreement.
Ah, yes, the wall of text everyone clicks agree on without reading.
Precisely. Your actual very limited rights are buried deep within those lengthy, jargon-filled documents, and they're contracts of adhesion.
Meaning, take it or leave it.
Exactly. No negotiation. You accept their terms wholesale, or you can't play the game you paid for. Players argue this is fundamentally unfair and non-transparent.
So even if it's technically legal, according to EULA,
It's widely perceived as a violation of a kind of social contract, bad faith. It severely erodes trust, especially for games that had significant single-player content wrapped up in that always-online requirement.
and that erosion of trust leads into another really powerful argument players make: the preservation of digital culture and art.
This one's gaining a lot of traction. Proponents argue, quite convincingly, that games are a defining artistic and cultural medium of the 21st century.
As significant as film, music, literature.
Every bit. And institutions like the Library of Congress actually agree they're archiving games. But there's a very real risk of a digital dark age here.
Because these games are fragile.
Exceptionally fragile, especially the digital-only, server-dependent ones. When those servers shut down, the games can be permanently lost, gone forever.
Is there data on that?
There is, and it's alarming. One study found something like 87% of classic U.S. video games are critically endangered, meaning they're not readily accessible anymore.
87%. Wow.
A cultural catastrophe in the making. It also means impeding historical and academic study. Future generations might not be able to access and study how games evolved, how design changed.
That really elevates the issue, doesn't it? Beyond just consumer rights.
It's a strategic reframing, yeah. It turns it from just, I didn't get what I paid for, into we are losing important artistic heritage.
Which gets museums, archives, even governments interested.
Exactly. It lends significant gravitas to the movement. You're petitioning not just for your purchase, but to preserve cultural output.
And beyond the cultural loss, there's the deeply personal impact for players, right? The sunk cost of fandom.
Huge. Think about the financial investment first. Beyond the initial purchase, players might spend hundreds, even thousands of dollars over the years.
On DLC, season passes, those microtransactions.
Right, all of which is effectively erased when the game shuts down. Poof, no refund.
And the time investment.
Countless hours. Mastering skills, completing quests, building characters, customizing bases.
All that effort and dedication just feels meaningless afterwards. Wiped away.
It can, yeah. And for many, games become deeply interwoven with their personal lives, their memories, sources of comfort, escape, maybe the backdrop for important friendships.
So shutdown can feel like losing a piece of your personal history.
It really can. Like a favorite hangout spot closing down, but digital and maybe more intense because of the interaction.
Which leads to the community aspect.
And finally, for many players, perhaps the most devastating impact is simply the collapse of their communities.
Because online games are social spaces.
Powerful social platforms. Players form deep friendships, create guilds or clans, find a crucial sense of belonging, sometimes for years. A server shutdown is like a digital eviction notice. It forcibly dissolves these carefully cultivated social ecosystems.
Gathering players, severing those bonds.
Exactly. Maybe they try to reform elsewhere, but often it leads to the eventual disintegration of those groups. It's a real loss.
Wow. Okay, so all these tensions, ownership, preservation, community, money, they recently just exploded around one specific game, didn't they? Ubisoft's The Crew.
The Crew really became the perfect storm, the flashpoint for all of this.
Remind us, it was a 2014 always-online racing game. But it had single-player, too.
That's right. A substantial single-player campaign, actually.
Yeah.
It got delisted from sale in December 2023, and then its servers were shut down completely on March 34, 2024.
Making all versions unplayable, even physical discs.
even the discs, which is why it became such a lightning rod.
Why this game in particular?
Several reasons converged. First, that destruction of a perfectly viable single-player experience really highlighted how arbitrary, how unnecessary that always online requirement often feels.
Well, more like DRM, digital rights management, than a service requirement.
Exactly. Second, it was a full-price, premium product people felt they had owned for years, strengthening that psychological sense of ownership. Third, crucially, it wasn't some dead game limping along. It had a living, breathing community, actively played by thousands.
Undermining the "it wasn't viable anymore" argument.
Completely. And fourth, Ubisoft's public stance was, let's say, uncompromising. It really fueled the fire.
How so? What do they do?
Well, not only did they shut it down, but there were reports they actually revoked the game licenses from players' digital libraries, so it disappeared entirely.
Wow.
And then you had public statements from executives like the infamous "get comfortable with not owning your games," end quote.
Oof. Yeah, it didn't go over well.
Widely interpreted as dismissive, arrogant, it just poured gasoline on the fire.
So this perfect storm led to actual legal fallout.
Yeah.
A lawsuit.
A class action lawsuit, yes. The plaintiffs' arguments focused heavily on misleading marketing.
Saying Ubisoft sold something that was only temporary.
Essentially, yes. They also pointed to things like the physical packaging showing activation codes supposedly valid until 2099, implying long-term playability.
2099. Okay,
Yeah.
that does seem misleading if it shuts down in 2024.
Right. And they had a novel argument, too, about the in-game currency being like a non-expiring gift certificate under California law.
Interesting angle. And Ubisoft's defense.
In their motion to dismiss, they leaned heavily on the EULA, naturally.
The fine print saves the day.
They argued the Crew was always advertised as online only. The terms explicitly stated it was a revocable license, not a sale. They basically said players got the benefit of their bargain years of access and couldn't complain now they were deceived. But this whole situation marked a critical inflection point. Ubisoft's absolute reliance on the EULA, while maybe legally sound on paper, became socially and reputationally untenable.
A PR nightmare.
A complete public relations disaster. It really forced the industry and regulators to sit up and take notice in a way they hadn't before.
And the outrage over the Crew didn't just fade away, did it? It actually channeled into something more organized.
Exactly. It fueled a very focused consumer advocacy campaign. Stop Killing Games, or SKG.
Launched by a YouTuber, Ross Scott.
That's right. In April 2024, he became the public face of it, and they have very clear goals.
It's important to clarify, though, they're not demanding servers stay on forever, are they?
No, not indefinite support. Their goals are more about fairness for the consumer and the long-term preservation of games as art after the publisher decides to end official service.
Okay, so what are they asking for specifically?
Their core proposals are pretty straightforward. First, mandatory offline functionality for games that have single-player content. If you could play it solo, you should still be able to.
Makes sense. And for multiplayer.
For multiplayer-centric games, they want the enablement of private servers, either by the publisher releasing the necessary server code or patching the game to allow community-run servers.
So players can keep it alive themselves.
Exactly. The ultimate big-picture goal is to legally and culturally reframe games as lasting products, not just disposable services.
Now, I heard there was some internal debate within the advocacy space between SKG and Pirate Software.
Yeah, there was a bit of back and forth. Jason Thor Hall, who runs Pirate Software, raised some concerns
What?
about the potential negative impact on small and independent developers. He worried that mandating costly end-of-life plans for all games could stifle innovation and really harm indie studios who don't have Ubisoft's resources.
That's a fair point. How did SKG respond?
Ross Scott clarified their focus is primarily on the large publishers like Ubisoft, EA, the ones profiting massively from the GOS model. The argument being, if you reap the huge rewards, you should bear the responsibility for a reasonable preservation plan, not necessarily the tiny indie team.
Okay, so targeting the big players. Despite that debate, the movement seems to have had a real impact. Politically.
A significant impact, yeah. The European Citizens Initiative, the ECI they launched, it gathered over 1 million verified signatures by July 2024.
1 million. Wow. What does that mean legally?
It legally compels the European Commission to formally review the proposal, meet with the organizers, and potentially propose EU-wide legislation based on it. It's a serious mechanism.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Any ripples elsewhere?
Oh, yeah. Global influence. A similar UK petition passed 100,000 signatures, triggering a debate in Parliament. There are government investigations or inquiries happening in Australia, Germany, France.
So governments are definitely paying attention now.
And we've even seen some industry concessions already. Ubisoft publicly committed to developing offline modes for The Crew 2 and The Crew Motorfest.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
After the backlash from the first game?
Directly in response, it seems. A clear concession to the campaign's core demands. That's a big win for the movement.
So what made SKG so successful, do you think?
A confluence of factors, really. The Crew was the perfect, unambiguous catalyst that made the problem crystal clear.
Right place, right time.
SKG then provided a memorable name, a charismatic leader in Ross Scott, and crucially, that specific, actionable political tool with the ECI. Made it easy for people to participate.
And the message was simple.
Very simple. You should be able to play what you bought. That resonates. And it got amplified hugely by major content creators. PewDiePie, Jacksepticeye, Moist01tikal, bringing it to millions.
Okay, so with all this pressure building, what are the actual alternatives? What pathways are being considered so games don't just vanish?
There's a range being discussed and even implemented, from publisher-led stuff to community efforts.
Let's start with the publishers. What can they do? Official end-of-life solutions.
Right. Publisher-led preservation, the most requested option, obviously, is official offline patches.
Like Ubisoft is now promising for The Crew 2.
Exactly. We've seen other examples, too, like Gran Turismo Sport, which got patched so players kept access to purchased vehicles and single-player modes after servers shut down. Kingdom Hearts Dark Road is another, so it is possible.
Okay. Any other official options?
A less drastic step sometimes is server consolidation. Instead of a full shutdown, they migrate the remaining smaller communities onto fewer servers to cut costs but keep the game alive.
Buys it some more time, at least. What if the publisher does nothing? That's where the community steps in.
That's when you see community-driven preservation take off the rise of fan servers.
Is that technically difficult?
The technical feasibility is actually quite impressive. Fans will literally reverse engineer the game's network code to create their own private servers from scratch.
Wow, real dedication.
It's led to thriving communities for dead MMOs people thought were gone forever, like City of Heroes or Star Wars Galaxies. It's a real testament to player passion and technical skill.
But is it legal?
That's the rub. Their legal status remains precarious. It often involves circumventing DRM and definitely involves unauthorized use of the game's IP.
So legally gray area.
At best. And there are often targets for legal action from publishers. Atlus famously sued the fan server for Shin Megami Tensei, Imagine, and got it shut down. Survival really depends on publisher whims and tolerance. Some turn a blind eye, others don't.
Which brings us back to that idea of publishers just releasing the server code.
Yeah, the server code dilemma. Players often say, just release the code, let us run it.
Seems simple, right?
From a publisher standpoint, it's one of the most problematic requests. We touched on why earlier.
Right, the embedded third-party IP.
Huge legal liability there. Security vulnerabilities, too. Server code might share elements with active games, creating risks.
And it's their trade secrets.
Exactly. It's a core business asset. Plus, frankly, internal server code is often a complex, convoluted mess, never intended for public eyes or easy setup. It's not user-friendly.
Okay, so official patches are ideal, fan servers are risky, releasing code is complicated. What about the regulatory path? What are governments actually looking at?
A key approach emerging seems to focus less on forcing preservation and more on mandating transparency up front.
Like that new California law.
Exactly. Starting in 2025, it prohibits using terms like buy or purchase for digital goods unless there's a clear and conspicuous disclosure right there.
Saying what?
Saying that consumers are only getting a limited license, not ownership, and that access could be revoked later.
So, managing expectations from the start.
Precisely. This approach is quite clever because it kind of sidesteps all those complex technical and IP preservation issues.
Doesn't force them to make offline patches.
Right. Instead, it focuses on ensuring informed consent. It respects publisher IP rights while empowering consumers to know exactly what they're getting or not getting when they click Buy Now.
Interesting. Sort of a truth in advertising for digital goods.
That's a good way to frame it.
So bringing this all together,
Yeah.
What does this whole conflict mean for us? It feels bigger than just games sometimes.
I think it is. This isn't just about video games. It's really a defining conflict of the digital age.
This clash
Between these new, really effective service-based business models and our older, enduring cultural expectations of ownership and permanence. What does it mean to own something you can't physically hold?
Yeah. So what are the key takeaways here? Where are we likely headed?
Well, first, the legal definition of ownership for digital games seems to be solidifying, not changing. They are licenses.
So we won't suddenly own our Steam library.
Probably not in the traditional sense. The battleground has shifted. It's now about fighting for minimum rights and guarantees within that license framework. What should that license guarantee?
Okay. And regulation.
Transparency seems the most likely near-term regulatory outcome. Expect more laws like California's Truth in Advertising rule popping up in other regions, probably including the EU, thanks to that ECI.
Manage expectations, make the terms clearer.
Exactly. We'll also probably see more industry self-regulation as a defensive measure.
Publishers trying to get ahead of stricter laws.
Plausibly. Creating voluntary standards may be guaranteeing advance notice for shutdowns of free-to-play games or committing to offline patches for premium single-player titles to preempt harsher government mandates.
And long-term. Any other possibilities?
A fascinating long-term possibility is a new role emerging for archival institutions. Think museums, libraries, groups like the Video Game History Foundation.
How would that work?
Potentially, a legal framework could be created, allowing publishers to transfer the code and necessary rights for abandoned digital games to these nonprofit cultural institutions.
For preservation.
For preservation and maybe limited non-commercial access for researchers or the public, removing the liability from the publishers once they've washed their hands of it. It's a complex idea, but one being discussed.
That would be something. Okay, so maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on.
As these digital products, games, movies, books, software, become more and more central to our lives.
Yeah.
What does ownership truly mean in this increasingly intangible world? And what responsibilities do we all bear, creators, publishers, and consumers, in preserving this new form of cultural heritage?
What does this all mean for the future of your own digital library? Something to think about.